This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson accused of planning to pave way for no-deal Brexit by temporarily shutting down Parliament. African leaders converge in Japan for TCAD. Is Africa equipped to fully benefit from this renewed interest by world powers? And in Somalia, concerns of electoral process after Al-Shabaab threats. You're watching Africa Live. A warm welcome from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Also in the studio with a sneak peek of what's ahead in business news is Rama.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up a little later in the hour. The 7th edition of TCAD kicks off in Tokyo, Japan. Over 20 African heads of state are in attendance. And Kenya's Anti-Corruption Commission has suspended the planned merger of Kenya's Telecom and Airtel mobile service providers. We'll explore why and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. And we begin in the UK. Britain's Queen Elizabeth has approved Prime Minister Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament until October 14th. He says this is in order to focus on the country's domestic needs such as security, education and healthcare. But the move has triggered outrage. Some lawmakers are accusing Johnson of purposely limiting the time to pass laws to stop a no-deal Brexit. If no deal is reached by October 31st, Britain will crash out of the European Union. The Prime Minister rejected the accusations.
That is completely untrue. If you look at what we're doing, we're bringing forward a new legislative programme on crime, on hospitals, making sure that we have the education funding that we need. And there will be ample time on both sides of that crucial October the 17th summit, ample time in Parliament for MPs to debate the EU, to debate Brexit and all the other issues. Ample time.
Earlier, our correspondent in London, Holly Hetson, told us about how Johnson's move will increase the chances of a no-deal Brexit and what we should expect next.
There's only 64 days until Brexit, so a no deal was looking increasingly likely anyway. And what Boris Johnson is now set to do will raise the likelihood of it even further. This is a clear message that he is pushing ahead with his do or die. We will leave the EU on the 31st of October with or without a deal. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition party Labour, led a meeting with a cross-party group of over 100 MPs and decided their tactics to block no deal would be legislation. So here's what Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, had to say today about Boris Johnson's plans to suspend Parliament.
We will do everything we can and we will join everybody else in doing that. I hosted a meeting of all opposition party leaders yesterday and we reached an agreement on what we will do next week, and we will continue working together with everyone who wants to prevent this smash and grab against our democracy by the Prime Minister.
They may well try and once again enforce a vote of no confidence, which would bring down Johnson's government and potentially trigger another general election. But there's an argument that that's what Boris Johnson does want, as he has a very slim majority of just one MP, and therefore a general election, which he thinks he could win, would actually give him a bigger majority and enable him to force through either no deal or at least his domestic agenda.
Now, US President Donald Trump has reaffirmed his support for UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson after Johnson moved to suspend Parliament ahead of Brexit. Taking to Twitter, Trump said Johnson was exactly what the UK has been looking for and will prove to be a great one. The president said he thought it would be difficult for UK opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn to seek a no-confidence vote against the Prime Minister. Japan has offered to enhance trade insurance in a bid to boost private sector investment in Africa. The insurance is expected to cover loans to African governments and expenses for infrastructure projects in the continent. Speaking at the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says Japan is pushing for stronger relations with African nations. However, he did not make a major funding announcement at the Tokyo meeting. And for more on this, we're joined by Gideon Chitanga, regional analyst at PESA, a political economical think tank in South Africa. We also have Achike Chude, an African affairs expert, joining us live from Lagos. Achike, we begin with you. Japan says it will drive African investment with enhanced trade insurance. What does this mean for Africa?
Well, obviously, Japan is arriving in the continent maybe a little bit late. And obviously, Japan is looking at the fact that its rival, economic rival, and China has made so much inroad into the continent. And China has pretty much covered so many aspects of investments in the African continent in terms of infrastructure, which sometimes it is done to some extent directly. And soft loans that have been given to the continent over time. Tens of billions of dollars have been spent in the continent by China. And so obviously Japan is hard put to look for ways to make inroads into the African continent. Let me just say that Africa continues to be the beautiful bride in terms of in terms of investments worldwide. Obviously, Africa is a very, very underdeveloped continent, and by implication, that means that there is so much investment to be done in the continent in virtually every aspect of the national life of countries within the continent. And so, Japan has come in with this package, with this model of enhancing trade insurance for African countries. This insurance will cover loans given to African countries, would also at the same time, loans to be given to affiliates of governments or institutions of government, as well as the organized private sector, that has benefited about $20 billion in loans, in the continent. And besides that, again, the caveat really is that most of these governments who would enjoy this trade insurance from Japan, it must be institutions or companies that are engaging in trade activities with Japan in terms of investing in Japanese infrastructural products. So this is essentially what the whole thing is all about.
All right.
The reality is that Africa continues to be courted by,
I wanted to bring in Gideon in South Africa. Gideon, Japan is among other world powers looking to strengthen cooperation with the African continent. What unique advantage does Japan have coming to Africa's development?
I think the biggest advantage is that Africa is at a stage where it's facing all these big powers who are trying to court it. And so the continent, barring the fragmentation at a political level and economic strategy, is possibilities to leverage this whole geopolitical interest to secure its developmental goals and to seek advantages where this is possible. But having said that, this interest remains historically, structurally skewed in favor of the big powers, whether you're talking Japan, China, the US, mainland Europe. And I think that other than the interest that we see, the difference in terms of benefits and how these benefits translate to gains for African communities, or direct gains in terms of trade, in terms of education, in terms of broader development as in infrastructure, it would be realized if African governments also in and by and for themselves develop strategies to make sure that the economic gains, the promising economic gains, can be fully utilized based on localized strategies, and not necessarily frameworks that are generated within the strategic interest of the big powers themselves.
All right.
So I think that until African countries are able to indigenize their developmental strategies and methods of engaging the big powers, the leakages and the huge differences in terms of balance of trade and so on will continue to exist, and the big powers remain the major benefactors.
All right, let's leave it there for now. Gideon Chitanga live for us in Johannesburg and Achika Chude live in Lagos. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Now, concerns are being raised in Somalia over how the government plans to hold general elections next year. This is after Al-Shabaab summoned and warned elders against taking part in any elections. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilu reports from Mogadishu on how this issue will impact upcoming polls.
Security forces rounded up the elders shortly after returning to Beledweyne, one of the biggest towns in central Somalia. In July, Al-Shabaab summoned clan elders and other individuals who took part in the 2016 electoral process, a move authorities say is aimed at undermining regional and upcoming national elections. Hundreds of clan elders heeded the militant calls and traveled to regions under the group for what has been termed as religious training. The Al-Qaeda-linked group seeks to topple the Somali government and plans to impose a strict version of Islam.
Security forces have rounded up all traditional elders and individuals who took part in the electoral process, and they are investigating what was discussed between the elders and Al-Shabaab. We have several in custody now, pending the outcome of the verdict from the police.
The group set up 4 centers in the southwest, Hirshabelle, Galmudug and Jubaland states. Al-Shabaab later released photos of elders receiving training. The government warned elders against attending such gatherings, but is also unable to provide security to these clan elders.
This issue is a threat to the state institutions and this region. It is unacceptable for clan elders to deal or cooperate with Al-Shabaab. We have sufficient evidence that includes pictures and audio recordings of some of those meetings, and we suspect that Al-Shabaab commissioned the elders to do their work for them.
The UN Human Rights Council has documented the killing of more than 40 clan elders and an unknown number of individuals who took part in the last election cycle. Experts now wonder how the government will be able to convince clan elders to take part in the upcoming electoral process without guaranteeing their safety. In 2016, a total of 14,000 electoral delegates picked by 135 clan elders helped form the federal parliament that later chose President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo in a secret ballot the following year. The government and political parties are yet to agree on the electoral model for the 2020 and 2021 electoral process. But whichever way is picked, clan elders must be involved unless the country ends its clan-based power-sharing structure that has been blamed for undermining political representation, especially among minority communities. Abdulaziz Bilu, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
At least 40 people are estimated to have drowned off the Libyan coast in the latest boat disaster on the Mediterranean Sea. 60 people are said to have been rescued and brought to shore in the coastal town of Al Khoms, about 100 kilometers east of Tripoli. A rescue operation carried out by the Libyan Coast Guard and local fishermen has been underway since the incident occurred. UNHCR spokesperson Charlie Yaxley says there is need for increased search and rescue capacity.
We estimate that around 40 people may have drowned in this incident, and this comes just weeks after 150 people lost their lives in the largest Mediterranean shipwreck of this year. And it means that now more than 900 people have lost their lives across the Mediterranean this year trying to reach European shores. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is calling for a drastic shift now in the approach to the Mediterranean. We need increased search and rescue capacity, including a return of EU state search and rescue vessels, and the lifting of NGO operations both at sea and in the air. Their efforts should be recognised and acknowledged, not criminalised nor stigmatised.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up after the break. 2019 CITES Convention ends with trade restrictions on various endangered species. And Milestone for Kenya's largest referral hospital as baby born at only 400 grams is discharged.
For look at some economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. and this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The UN Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species have wrapped up in Geneva with an impressive list of decisions. Hundreds of species of animals and plants were debated over 11 days. However, the end result for African elephants was mainly status quo, as our correspondent Julia Libova reports.
African elephants were a controversial agenda item at this year's CITES convention here in Geneva. There were three contradictory proposals up for debate. Some South African nations wanted to open up the ivory trade, while some Northern African nations, as well as others, wanted to give African elephants the maximum protection by placing them on Appendix 1 of the CITES Treaty, which prohibits international commercial trade. Well, all three of those proposals were rejected by member states, and this means that the situation for African elephants is in status quo, and this means that trade restrictions were not at least weakened. However, there was a resolution passed on the sidelines of the CITES Convention. The resolution bans the sale of baby elephants from the wild to zoos and circuses around the world. And some animal welfare groups have called this resolution a momentous win. But it was also momentous for giraffes, who got extra protection for the first time. Giraffe was uplisted to Appendix 2 of the CITES Convention, which restricts commercial trade. Also, 18 species of shark were also put on Appendix 2 to protect them from international trade for their highly valued fins. Smaller animals, such as Asian otter, were given the strongest protection by being placed on Appendix 1, which bans international commercial trade. However, some animals, such as the Mexican crocodile, were actually downlisted due to conservation and management efforts, which means that the population is actually growing. Julia Libova, CGTN, Geneva.
Delegates are meeting in Ethiopia to discuss climate change solutions on the African continent. The meeting has been organized by the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Its aim is to find an action plan ahead of next month's UN Climate Action Summit, as CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports.
As the world grapples with the effect of climate change, the consequences across Africa are becoming more urgent.
Early this year, tropical cyclones Idai and Kenneth ripped through 5 African countries, Mozambique, Malawi, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and the Comoros, both within a period of 1 month. More than 1,000 lives lost, $100 billion in damages, and it will take at least $2 billion, perhaps more, to mount an effective recovery and the needed rehabilitation efforts.
Delegates from countries around Africa are here to prepare for an upcoming UN Climate Summit. They say there is no shortage of ideas, but the answer lies in implementation.
Since the Paris Agreement was concluded, emissions have not necessarily come down, or if they have come down, it's not at the rate that was anticipated in the agreement, and it's certainly not at the rate that is necessary to ensure that we do avoid dangerous interference with the climate system. So we do know that there are problems. There are a multitude of problems that need to be addressed.
The UN says Africa is only responsible for 4% of greenhouse gas emissions, but 65% of the continent is directly impacted by climate change. So African governments are being urged to take action.
We have the solution to climate change and only need the political will to make it happen. Then the intriguing question that immediately arises is, why is political will so lacking?
Part of the problem is finding the funds. Nearly $3 trillion is needed to finance plans to tackle climate change, according to the UN. African countries hope to get this from their national budgets, continental financial institutions, and foreign assistance. Developed nations have pledged $100 billion annually to help developing countries deal with environmental issues. African delegates are calling on them to deliver on this commitment because without their backing, climate plans could remain an empty promise. Colette Wanjohi, CGTN, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Brazil now says it will accept foreign aid to help fight fires in the Amazon on condition that it determines how it will be spent. The announcement comes after governors of states in the Brazilian Amazon told the president that they needed the money to help fight the record wildfires in the world's largest tropical rainforest. G7 leaders pledged $22 million after discussing the fires ravaging an area often dubbed the lungs of the world. And for more on this, we're joined by Lucrecia Franco in Rio de Janeiro. Lucrecia, can you give us an update on the fires in the Amazon?
Hi, Peninah. Actually, the fires, the situation is not getting better, even if they have sent firefighters, troops, their planes dumping water in the blazes. The numbers of fires, new fires, keep raising every day. Now, the last information that I had now is that 10,000 fires were spotted in over a week, and that is added to the almost 75,000 fires that were recorded from January to August this year. That's an 84%, 85% increase compared to the same period last year. There's smoke reaching several cities. There was smoke that even reached Sao Paulo last year, blackening the cities, the biggest city in Brazil. So the situation is seems a little bit out of control. These are the worst fires, actually, since the Brazil Space Agency started monitoring these fires in 2013. And well, it's considered an international crisis. There's national, international concern about this. The G7 countries that met in France this weekend offered $20 million, and that was initially rejected and now finally accepted by President Jair Bolsonaro, but with some conditions. Yesterday, Brazil's presidential press secretary, Otávio Rego Barros, said that Brazil was open to receive financial support from organizations and even from countries, but the key point was that this support did not offend Brazil's sovereignty and that the management of these resources would be under Brazil's control. This announcement comes after Brazil's president dropped his demands of an apology from French President Emmanuel Macron, who accused him of actually lying to him about climate efforts and suggesting the creation of an international alliance to save the Amazon.
And
Peninah.
Lucrecia, you've mentioned, of course, the help from the G7 leaders that was pledged. What other countries have offered to help Brazil as it deals with these fires?
Well, until now, and we don't have actually confirmation if they have been accepted or not, but it's Britain that's pledged $12 million for the effort, Canada $11 million. Israel said it would send a shipment of flame-retarding chemicals. Also Colombia and Chile are offering assistance. Actually, the one from Chile has been accepted because Bolsonaro said he's meeting with President Piñera today in Brasilia, and he said that a meeting with regional neighbors, except Venezuela, would be held on September 6th in the Colombian city of Leticia to discuss common policy in defense of the Amazon. That means that he's trying to now gather some support from its neighbors, except Venezuela, as I said. And we don't know what will be accepted or not, but the G7 financial support would be accepted with the conditions of if Brazil, as I said, can control and manage those resources. Well, and meanwhile, there have been protests all the time. Today, there are going to be protests. There were 30 protests during the weekend here in Brazil, in several cities. Social media frenzy over this situation, and mostly blaming the president, Bolsonaro. He's a pro-agriculture. He wants the development of the Amazon for the actually encouraging farmers to set the fires that are intended to clear land for crops and cattle raising.
Okay. All right, Lucrecia, thank you for that update. Lucrecia Franco live for us there in Rio de Janeiro. A baby who weighed 400 grams when he was born has been discharged from Kenya's biggest health facility in a milestone for the country. The boy, who now weighs 3.5 kilograms, is expected to meet normal developmental milestones following his discharge and will be monitored periodically to track his progress.
This was baby Jeremy's introduction to the world outside his hospital ward. It was also his going away party. After 5 months at Kenyatta National Hospital's newborn unit, baby Jeremy was finally going home to his parents and 2 older siblings. A sleepy Jeremy couldn't understand the fuss around him, but friends and family couldn't contain their joy. Their baby had beaten the odds. Jeremy was born on 1st of April, long before he was due.
The normal pregnancy goes up to 40 weeks. This baby was born at 24 weeks, weighing 400 grams. In many setups, most of these babies have actually not developed. The organs have not developed, many things have not developed, and the viability of these babies, rarely they come to age.
The odds seemed to be against the newborn baby. Doctors at the facility knew they had to act fast to save him.
The maturity of the organs is what is in question, especially the lungs. And that's why I had to give her the injection to help mature the lungs of the baby. At that particular time, even the breathing is a problem. Keeping temperature is a problem. Prone to infection because of the low immunity. And rickets because of lack of the calcium from the mother, and even challenges of feeding the baby.
5 months later, Jeremy hit 3.5 kilograms and was ready to be discharged.
I am so much happy, overwhelmed. The journey has come to a point that I can say now I can hold the baby without any fear. Before I could have looked at the baby in the incubator. Even I was scared to go to the nursery to check the baby because I didn't know whether I would find the baby alive or dead. But I'm so grateful at this time.
Among those waiting to see Jeremy off was 8-year-old Hope. She too weighed 400 grams when she was born at the same facility. Today she's a healthy, happy child, the kind of child Jeremy's family hopes he will grow into. Medics say a variety of health issues such as diabetes or high blood pressure in the mother can cause premature birth. Worldwide, an estimated 15 million babies are born too early every year. The key, medics believe, lies in frequent prenatal visits where problems can be identified early. For the family of 5, a new chapter now begins, one full of hope and optimism. It is estimated that 1 in every 8 babies born in Kenya is preterm. Baby Jeremiah is, however, a testament that with early diagnosis and proper care, such babies can survive, spelling hope to other parents. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
It's truly incredible. Now, the Cash for Shelter project by the UN Refugee Agency is helping to empower refugees and their hosts in Kenya. Under the scheme, UNHCR uses cash assistance to help refugees in Karibe settlement to construct durable and permanent shelters while reducing dependency on aid. This is meant to provide a shift from the traditional refugee camp planning process.
The UN Refugees Agency's Cash Assistance Project started in 2016, but began 2 years later in Karibe camp in Kenya. It looks to ensure socio-economic integration of refugees in local community, while reducing dependency on humanitarian aid. In Karibe camp, around 12 to 14 houses can be built in an average of 22 days.
The refugees will be able to buy materials from any supplier. Most of the supplier currently are the host community, and also the masons are both the refugees and the host community.
Refugees also have access to banking services, benefiting the local economy and improving social coexistence. 25-year-old Florence Idiongo is one of the beneficiaries. She fled South Sudan in 2016.
This is my bed, and this bed is for my children. So I really very happy with my house. You buy clothes to the children, and you will buy also mattress, chairs, curtain inside there, and you will feel okay as now people relax.
In the past 3 years, the project has assisted more than 16 million people in 100 countries to build or improve their homes. Chomhono, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Time now to catch up with the latest business news, and for that we cross over to Rama.
That's right, Peninah. Thank you very much. We'll be back in 60 seconds with more business.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in Nigeria. The central bank of there has told lenders to stop processing milk imports on a credit basis. Now, the bank said last month that it would ban access to foreign currency for imports of this nature in order to spur local production. Nigeria spends anywhere between $1.2 and $1.5 billion a year just importing dairy produce. Now, the country's central bank says it will add milk imports to its restricted list for $4 sales, although it did not say exactly when that ban comes into force. The regulator said milk imports will no longer be eligible under payment terms known as bills for collection, effectively that allows the importer to buy the goods on credit. Importers now will have to fund their Naira accounts or open letters of credit. Well, in South Africa, the government over there may be forced to inject more money into the state power firm Eskom by the end of March 2020. The government will step in again should the struggling utility fail to meet its full-year borrowing plan. Treasury has already earmarked $3.9 billion for Eskom over the next 2 fiscal years as part of a special appropriation bill. $1.7 billion has been allocated until the end of March 2020. Now, failure to execute its planned funding plan may result in Eskom experiencing liquidity shortfalls before the end of the first quarter next year, and that's entitled to trigger the need for additional funding, in addition to the funding already provided by taxpayers through the special appropriation bill. Now, a deal to turn Kenya's cellular service market into a duopoly is on hold at the moment at the request of the country's Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. The agency's probing events 7 years ago when the Kenyan government's stake in the company was diluted to 40% after it chose to not put in extra debt into the firm. Earlier on, I spoke to the CEO of Telecom Kenya, Mugo Kibati. I started by asking him why a deal agreed to nearly a decade ago has temporarily stalled the formation of the Airtel-Telecom joint venture.
I'm at a loss to see the connection between an investigation into a transaction 7 years ago with business today. In any case, having seen that particular set of recommendations, I see no remedy. First of all, no remedy should they find any culpability, and I doubt there is none, because I've also reviewed the situation as to what happened during the restructuring. I see nothing wrong having happened. I think it was just basically a simple dilution between dilution between two shareholders where one issued debt and one did not. It's typical, it happens in businesses, and maybe some people don't understand that. No problem, they can investigate it. I don't think there'll be anything wrong, but in any case, even if there was to be a problem, which I doubt, there's no remedy, legal or constitutional, that would have an impact on the ongoing transaction.
Right, so going back to the joint venture, so what's a final shareholding of that going to look like, and what are the relative strengths that you're bringing to the party?
So the final shareholding really is simple. It will primarily be aligned to the revenues contributed by both entities. And roughly speaking, we contribute about a third. I mean, Telecom is about a half the size of Airtel in terms of revenues. So kind of a 2-to-1 split. So that is why we've said in our announcement that we roughly expect about 30% plus or minus, because the final shareholding will depend on the relative revenues at the point of closing the deal. You know, the last 12 months at the point of closing the deal. So until we close the deal and we're able to make that determination, we can't give you an exact figure, but it wouldn't move too far away from around the 30% to 70% range, between Telecom being the minority and Airtel being the majority shareholder, with an option for Telecom to beef up its shareholding to 49% for a cash consideration. But if that was to happen, that won't be immediate. That would be down the road. It's not being considered at this point in time.
It's one thing to say, okay, now we've put these two entities together, but as you said, there's a competition problem in the market. A big chunk of revenues are heading over to one player. Looking at Airtel's books, they've been bleeding money for years. So once this combined entity is in the market, comes into play, will we really have cured that competition problem?
I think the point we're trying to make is that, first of all, beyond making a point, both companies, Telecom as well as Airtel, have adjudged it to be unviable to continue as they are today. And this is a point that we have made over many years, that we have a failed market structure where there is a dominance by one particular player, and that dominance has starved the sector from further investment, whether it be by the existing small players or by new investors. So the point of Helios coming in some 3 years ago, the predecessors, Orange, had spent a long time, 2 years, looking for a suitor. Nobody was interested in coming into this market for the reasons that, you know, because of the failed market structure. So this transaction will not cure. However, it basically allows for the existence of a player who is stronger than either of the existing number 2 and number 3 players.
Just to loop back to the point you made, Orange spent time looking for a partner. Helios comes in, looks at the business and says, well, we'll buy 60% of this. But as you point out, there's still a competition problem. Yes. So why sink in those billions into buying 60% of Telecom if there is a competition problem that's not been solved?
I think we're talking about today. That was an assessment that was made 3 years ago. There are assumptions that were made, obviously, about regulatory reform that never took place, right? I think one would have been incredulous to believe that we would come to this point in time where we have one player who is responsible for 105% of the profits in this particular sector. 105% is basically above 100%. And so I think those assumptions were made 3 years ago, do not pertain today, right? And I'm talking about today. As we stand today, even with regulatory reform, the two entities found it necessary. I mean, even if it was to happen, we'd still need to merge the businesses that we're merging. But that will not be sufficient without further regulatory reform, just because of the dominance of the main player.
Now, on to the southern end of the continent. Mozambique could be on its way to becoming one of the continent's major producers of coffee, and that's thanks to a major increase in coffee production on Mount Gorongosa. Now, the presence of Renamo rebels right at the top of that mountain had been restricting the expansion of coffee and other agricultural produce. But with the recently signed peace agreement, assuming it holds, there are plans to dramatically scale up coffee output. The coffee giant Nespresso has already taken quite an interest in the project.
Quarida Berenikwa intently sorts through the coffee beans. She's one of 400 Mozambican farmers producing coffee to earn an income while helping reforest Mount Gorongosa.
I like growing coffee because it earns cash that goes right into my pocket, which allows me to buy all household items. It's very useful. I would love my kids to have hope in terms of growing coffee because it offers a source of hope.
This hope came after Mozambique's government and Renamo rebels signed a peace agreement in early August.
After the political situation calmed down, we were able to initiate the scaling phase, and that's what we're in now. We're in an exponential growth phase. So we started with this 40,000 trees, which is what the coffee that's produced behind me, that's where that comes from, is this pilot phase. And now, this year, we've already planted 300,000 coffee trees.
Experts also see the climate around Mount Gorongosa as ideal for better tasting coffee beans.
This is an effort to grow this very high quality premium commodity for the community, and at the same time inter-row crop with staple food products, staple food crops, and this agroforestry system. So this is native hardwood trees planted alongside the coffee trees. And what that does is it provides this shade, about 60-40% shade for the coffee, and that creates this really high quality coffee, big beans, delicious coffee beans.
Mozambique is not considered to be one of Africa's major coffee producers like Ethiopia and Kenya. But Mount Gorongosa's unique climate makes it very promising. Chamhono, CGTN.
One final story for you. The former head of Uber's autonomous vehicles project, Anthony Lewandowski, has been charged by a U.S. federal grand jury with theft of trade secrets. The indictment charges him with 33 counts of trade secrets theft while he was working at Google. According to the jury, months before he resigned from the Alphabet-owned company, he reportedly downloaded quite a few files from the company's internal drives. Now, the latest sentiment mirrors allegations that Google's unit, Waymo, made in a 2017 civil lawsuit against Uber. Lewandowski pleaded not guilty to the charges, but if found guilty, he faces a maximum sentence of 10 years and a fine of $250,000 plus restitution for each violation.
Lewandowski resigned from Google without prior notice to Google. The indictment alleges that Lewandowski made the decision to leave Google no later than September 2015, and that he used the time between September 2015 and January 27, 2016 to remove thousands of files from Google. Just weeks after his resignation from Google, in February 2016, Lewandowski signed a term sheet with Uber, a company that was investing heavily in its own self-driving car program. The indictment is a charge against Lewandowski. The indictment is not a charge against Uber. Both Uber and Google were responsive to my office in response to criminal process, in response to requests for information. Both Uber and Google provided documents and other information in support of the investigation.
I'll be there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. When we return in Global Business, we'll be looking at South Africa's Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, and his latest policy paper where he lays out his plan to kickstart growth in Africa's most industrialized economy. We'll have the details on that and plenty more live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. And you're watching Africa Live, coming up after the break. We take you to Ethiopia, where Rehab Center takes on cart addiction.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now head to Ethiopia, where more and more people are seeking help in the only government-funded drug rehabilitation center as debate on the potency of khat as a drug continues. A huge population of Ethiopians love chewing khat, yet many still view it as a less toxic drug. Here's Beryl Oro with more on that.
At the Mekelle Substance Rehabilitation Center, the number of Ethiopians seeking help from various addictions has been increasing each year. One such case is Jonas Getu Mola. His journey into the deadly world of drug addiction started with chewing khat, as a way of keeping awake, to study as he pursued a degree in architecture.
I've been in addiction for the past 15 years with a lot of addictive substances like chat, like cigarette, like marijuana.
He is one of the many here where the government provides full long-term and short-term rehabilitation. Most of these patients seem to have started off with chewing khat.
The whole night they can read. Most of them they start chewing chat for reading, for increasing capacity of work, for increasing the performance in study in different works.
Chewing khat is one of the many things that defines Ethiopia's social fabric. Medical experts have warned that chewing khat causes loss of appetite, damaged teeth, and lack of sleep. But its link to low libido amongst men could have led to the banning of this drug in the United States, United Kingdom, and Netherlands.
That's not true. The people who say that were already addicted to alcohol and other drugs before they used khat.
Actually, khat is Ethiopia's second biggest export after coffee. It exports to the neighboring Somalia, Djibouti, and even abroad. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And coming up in sports. Chess makes a comeback in Morocco as stakeholders look up to its inclusion in the 2024 Olympics.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.